84,000 years. That is the human lifespan described in the Aganya Sutta. To a historian, it is a myth. To a skeptic, it is a joke. But if you look at it through the lens of a molecular biologist, that figure is not an error. It might be the only logical conclusion regarding our origin. We are currently living in a biological dark age, where we have accepted a lifespan of less than 100 years as an absolute law. But what if the Buddha was not telling a fairy tale? What if he was describing a superior biological operating system that we have simply forgotten how to run? 1. The myth of inevitable death. We are conditioned to believe that aging is an immutable law of physics. We think that to live is to decay. That is a lie. In nature, there exists a phenomenon called negligible senescence. It refers to organisms that do not show any functional decline or increased mortality rate as they age. Look at the Turritopsis dohrnii, the immortal jellyfish. When this creature faces injury, disease, or even starvation, it does not die. Instead, it triggers a radical cellular process called transdifferentiation. It instructs its specialized cells to revert back to their earliest, most basic state, essentially turning from a mature adult back into a juvenile polyp. It then begins its life cycle all over again. It loops this cycle infinitely. Then there is the hydra. This tiny freshwater organism is composed almost entirely of stem cells that are constantly dividing. In a laboratory setting, researchers have watched hydras for decades without seeing a single sign of aging or a spike in death rates. These creatures prove a terrifying truth. Biology does not mandate death. Death is not a destiny. It is a program failure. The hardware of life is capable of running indefinitely. The real question is not how the ancients lived so long, but what exactly broke our software. 2. The telomere countdown. The first suspect lies deep within your DNA, specifically the telomeres. Think of them like the protective plastic tips at the end of your shoelaces. They keep your genetic code from fraying. In our modern bodies, every time a cell divides to repair a wound or grow tissue, these tips get shorter. When they run out, the cell enters a state of senescence. It becomes a zombie cell that can no longer divide, but continues to pump out toxins. This is the Hayflick limit, the biological hard cap on human mortality. But here is the insider secret. We actually have the tool to fix this. It is an enzyme called Telomeres. This enzyme can rebuild those protective tips, effectively resetting the cellular clock. In your body right now, this enzyme is switched off in almost all healthy cells. However, it remains terrifyingly active in cancer cells. Cancer cells are biologically immortal. They are just immortal in the wrong way, growing without regulation. The beings described in the texts, those with mind-made bodies, likely possessed a genome where telomerase was fully active and perfectly regulated by the body's innate intelligence. They existed in a state of continuous, flawless regeneration. A lifespan of 84,000 years was simply the natural runtime of a machine that could self-repair faster than it could degrade. 3. The dirty fuel paradox and thermodynamics. The second reason we die young is purely thermodynamic. We are running on dirty fuel. Physics is ruthless. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy or disorder always increases in a closed system. In a biological system, we call this metabolic stress. We currently sustain ourselves through edible food, matter. To extract energy, your body must act as a violent chemical refinery. It takes complex structures like protein or carbohydrates and breaks their chemical bonds to release energy in the form of ATP. This process is inherently chaotic. It produces reactive oxygen species, or free radicals. Think of free radicals as biological rust. They are unstable molecules that tear electrons away from your healthy cells, damaging your DNA and cellular membranes. We are literally burning ourselves alive to survive. It is the metabolic equivalent of pouring dirty, unrefined coal into a high-performance engine. The engine runs, but the thick smoke and soot choke the machinery until it seizes. Now look at the Buddhist description of the primordial era. Those beings did not eat matter. They fed on delight or the rapture of meditation. From a physics perspective, Delight is not just a feeling. It is a high-coherence energy state. When the brain enters deep meditation, it achieves a state of low entropy. The energy flows without resistance and without the chaotic breaking of chemical bonds. Because they lived on pure energy, rather than the combustion of matter, their biological engines ran cool and clean. They did not have to devote massive amounts of energy to digestion or detoxification. Without the oxidative stress of processing crude matter, cellular degradation was nearly non-existent. They were powered by quantum coherence, not by burning carbon. 4. The epigenetic downgrade trigger. But if we were so perfect, why did we fall? The final blow was not physical, it was psychological. This is where science meets the sutta. The texts state that humanity began to decline when craving, or tanha, arose. Most people read this as a moral allegory. It is not. It is a biological description of the epigenetic downgrade trigger. Epigenetics is the study of how your environment and behaviors turn your genes on or off. Your DNA is the hardware, but your mind is the user, typing the commands. When the early beings tasted the essence of the earth and felt greed, a catastrophic shift occurred. Craving is a profound biological stressor. The moment you crave something, you introduce the concept of lack and the fear of losing. This triggers the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mode. In the primordial state, humans were in a perpetual rest and repair mode. Cellular maintenance was the absolute priority. But the moment greed appeared, the body received a new signal. The environment is now hostile and resources are scarce. Evolutionary biology follows a rule called the disposable soma theory. If the environment is dangerous, the body stops wasting energy on trying to live forever. Instead, it diverts all resources to rapid maturation and reproduction to ensure the species survives before the individual dies. The command was sent through methylation tags, chemical handcuffs that attach to your DNA. These tags locked away the genes responsible for immortality and longevity, such as the sirtuin genes. The body became coarse and heavy. Sexual differentiation appeared because sexual reproduction is nature's backup plan when individual immortality fails. We traded longevity for continuity. The drop from 84,000 years to our current state was not a punishment from a deity. It was a cumulative, self-inflicted genetic downgrade. We let the virus of craving rewrite our operating system from eternal maintenance to panic survival. The frightening reality is that we are still doing it today. With every moment of stress, hatred, and unbridled desire, we are not just shortening our own lives. We are actively writing the code for the extinction of our species. We are accelerating the very entropy that our ancestors once knew how to defy. If the emergence of craving was the spark that lit the fire of our biological decline, then the history of human morality is the fuel that has kept that fire burning for millennia. To understand why our lifespan collapsed from 84,000 years to a mere heartbeat in cosmic time, we have to stop looking at evil as a religious transgression. We must start seeing it as a physiological poison. In the framework of the zero-entropy biological state, every immoral act described in the ancient suttas, killing, stealing, lying, is actually a high-intensity signal sent directly to your genome. We are not being punished for our sins. We are being destroyed by the biological consequences of our choices. The downward spiral is a process of cascading epigenetic failure. Think of your DNA as a vast library of instructions. When humanity lived in a state of high virtue, the longevity wing of that library was wide open. But as society became more complex and competitive, we began to prioritize short-term survival over long-term maintenance. This is the biological definition of the de-evolution described by the Buddha. The human body shifted its fundamental energy allocation from cellular immortality to panic survival. The first major accelerator in this decay was the introduction of systemic violence. From a neurobiological perspective, the act of killing, or living in constant fear of being killed, places the organism in a state of hypercortisolemia. When the brain perceives a threat to life, it floods the system with adrenaline and cortisol. In short bursts, this is life-saving. It provides the sudden energy needed to fight or flee. But when a species turns toward chronic violence, this hormonal flood becomes permanent. Chronic stress is the ultimate epigenetic axe. It prunes the telomeres at an accelerated rate and inhibits the production of growth hormones. The genome receives a clear and devastating message: the world is lethal. Do not invest in long-term cellular repair. Spend everything on immediate survival and rapid reproduction. Each generation born into this environment of violence inherited a pre-stressed epigenome. These epigenetic markers, known as methylation tags, are passed down, meaning children are born with shorter telomeres and a higher sensitivity to stress than their ancestors. We created a feedback loop of biological degradation. The second accelerator was the breakdown of truth, specifically the act of lying. To the modern mind, a lie is just a minor social friction. To the biological system, a lie is a massive cognitive tax. Maintaining a lie requires the brain to hold two conflicting versions of reality simultaneously. This creates a state of intense neurological friction. It activates the HPA axis in the same way physical pain or trauma does. As the scriptures describe the period where lying became prevalent, they also note a sharp, non-linear drop in lifespan. This is a cold biological fact. A society built on deception is a society in a constant state of high entropy. When the collective consciousness of a species moves from coherence to fragmented deception, the brain must work harder to navigate its environment. This friction generates internal heat, metabolic waste that accelerates the rusting of the cells. We literally lied ourselves into an early grave by forcing our brains to operate under the stress of a fractured reality. This process reached its absolute bottom in the prophecy of the sword interval. The Buddha described a time when the human lifespan would drop to just 10 years. In this state, children reach sexual maturity at the age of 5 and are considered old by 10. From a genetic standpoint, this is the maximum entropy state. It is the point where the DNA repair mechanisms have almost completely seized up. The body has become so coarse, so saturated with the toxins of hatred, fear, and deception, that it can only sustain the most basic biological functions. In this state, the enzyme telomerase is almost entirely silenced. The body is in a state of permanent inflammation. It is the end of the human experiment. A biological dead end where the species becomes indistinguishable from a virus that consumes itself in a frenzy of survival. This is not a future we should wait for. It is a direction we are already moving toward every time we prioritize the short-term gain over the long-term integrity of our mind and body. But the most revolutionary aspect of the Buddha's timeline is not the fall. It is the U-turn. The suttas explain that once humanity hits this rock bottom, the process can be reversed. This is the ultimate proof that our lifespan is not a fixed genetic hard cap, but a flexible epigenetic variable. The reversal begins with a single act of ahimsa, or non-violence. When a small group of individuals decides to stop the cycle of hatred and retreats to practice metta, something miraculous happens in their biology. Science is now beginning to map this virtue-biology connection. When we practice deep compassion and mental stillness, the brain produces high levels of oxytocin and serotonin. These are not just feel-good chemicals. Oxytocin is a potent anti-inflammatory agent. It has been shown to protect the heart and, more importantly, to stimulate the repair of damaged DNA. When the mind shifts from fight or flight back to rest and repair, the chemical environment of the cell changes instantly. The methylation tags that locked away the longevity genes begin to dissolve. This is reverse epigenetics. By changing the input, choosing compassion over craving and truth over deception, we send a new signal to our DNA. The environment is safe. You may resume long-term maintenance. As these individuals live longer and teach their children the path of virtue, the next generation inherits a cleaner, more robust epigenome. The lifespan begins to double, moving from 10 to 20, then 40, 80, 160, and eventually back to the tens of thousands. We have been taught that we are the victims of time, destined to wither and die within a century. But the ancient wisdom, supported by modern epigenetic theory, suggests we are the architects of our own aging. The story of the 84,000-year lifespan is not a memory of a lost past. It is a blueprint for a possible future. It tells us that death is not an absolute law, but a biological habit dictated by the quality of our consciousness. We are currently standing at a crossroads. We can continue our descent into the 10-year lifespan of the sword interval, fueled by greed and digital stress, or we can begin the long, deliberate climb back to the age of light. Our bodies are waiting for the signal to repair themselves. That signal is written in every thought you think and every word you speak. They are the chemical commands that dictate the very length of your life. The path to the zero-entropy biological state is not a myth. It is a decision to live in harmony with the laws of life.